Part 1: Peter Popoff. Faith became spectacle long before audiences realized it. Television turned religion into a stage, and preachers into performers measured not by humility but by reach, charisma, and emotional impact. In this environment, belief was no longer quiet or personal. It was public, dramatic, and highly visual. Viewers were invited into living rooms filled with miracles, tears, and promises that seemed tailor-made for people at their most vulnerable. This was the world in which Peter Popoff rose to prominence. Popoff did not present himself as a teacher or theologian. He positioned himself as a messenger receiving direct whispers from God. On stage, surrounded by thousands, he spoke names, illnesses, family details, and private struggles with absolute confidence. For those watching, the experience felt intimate and supernatural at the same time. A man on a brightly lit platform appeared to know secrets that no stranger should ever know. For people facing illness, debt, or despair, that knowledge felt like proof of divine presence. The structure of his services followed a careful rhythm. Before the broadcast, attendees filled out prayer cards. Names, addresses, medical concerns, financial worries, personal fears. These cards looked harmless, even devotional. They felt like an act of faith. But they became the foundation of a carefully engineered performance. What the audience saw as spontaneous revelation was actually precision timing, theatrical delivery, and unseen coordination. Behind the curtain, technology replaced mystery. A small earpiece rested in Popoff's ear. A radio signal carried information from backstage. His wife read details from the prayer cards, feeding them to him line by line. On stage, Popoff repeated those details as if receiving them from heaven. The pauses, the gasps, the sudden shifts in tone were not accidents. They were cues, designed to heighten emotion and reinforce belief. For viewers at home, the illusion was even stronger. Television removed context. It framed Popoff as a solitary figure channeling divine power in real time. The camera never showed the cards. It never showed the earpiece. It never showed the people coordinating the flow of information. Faith filled the gaps that production carefully left open. The turning point came when skepticism finally caught up with spectacle. Investigators attended the services not as believers but as observers. Radio scanners revealed voices on hidden frequencies. Instructions, names, and medical details traveled through the air, not from heaven but from backstage. What looked miraculous became mechanical. What sounded divine became procedural. When the recordings aired on national television, the impact was immediate and devastating. Viewers heard the same voices Popoff heard. They recognized the same phrases spoken moments later from the pulpit. The spell broke in real time. Faith collapsed under the weight of evidence. The performance could no longer hide behind mystery. The consequences followed quickly. Donations slowed, then stopped. Legal pressure mounted. Ministries that rely on constant inflow cannot survive exposure, and Popoff's empire began to fracture. Bankruptcy followed. To many observers, the story appeared finished. A preacher unmasked, a movement dismantled, a cautionary tale completed. But belief does not disappear as easily as facts. Time passed. Audiences changed. Memories faded. Popoff returned, not with the same message, but with a new symbol. Small packets of so-called miracle water arrived in mailboxes. Letters promised breakthroughs, financial relief, unexpected blessings. The water itself was ordinary. Its power existed only in the story attached to it. The language of the letters was carefully crafted. They spoke directly to fear and longing. Each message felt personal, as if written for a single recipient. Some promised relief from debt. Others warned of spiritual danger unless action was taken. The requests for offerings were framed not as transactions, but as acts of faith. Giving became proof of belief. Doubt became the enemy. This second rise was quieter but more efficient. Late-night television slots reached audiences who had never seen the original scandal. To them, Popoff was not a disgraced figure from the past. He was simply another voice offering hope in a crowded media landscape. Regulation struggled to keep up. Voluntary donations blurred the line between persuasion and responsibility. The deeper story was never just about one preacher. It was about the system that allowed performance to replace accountability. Television rewarded emotion. Charisma outweighed transparency. Success became evidence of truth. In that environment, belief itself became a commodity, shaped and sold through lighting, music, and timing. Popoff's career illustrates how easily faith can be guided by presentation. When miracles are framed as products, belief becomes vulnerable to manipulation. The more desperate the audience, the more powerful the promise. Hope, once separated from verification, becomes endlessly renewable. His story is not unique because of its details, but because of its pattern. Rise through spectacle. Fall through exposure. Return through reinvention. Each phase depends on the same constant. People searching for meaning are willing to trust voices that sound certain. Especially when those voices claim divine authority. The lesson does not rest in condemnation, but in awareness. Faith thrives in sincerity. It fractures when filtered through performance. When belief is mediated through cameras and scripts, it becomes difficult to tell where devotion ends and direction begins. Some viewers will see Popoff as a cautionary figure. Others will see him as proof that belief is resilient, even when challenged. The uncomfortable truth sits between those views. Hope is powerful, but it is also fragile. When packaged convincingly, it can be sold again and again, even after the curtain has already been pulled back once. What do you think matters more in moments of desperation, the promise itself or the proof behind it? In the next part, the story moves from one man to an entire empire, where faith, entertainment, and ambition merged into something far larger and far more destructive. Part 2, Jim Bakker. Religion did not turn into entertainment overnight. It evolved slowly, shaped by cameras, applause, and the growing belief that faith needed spectacle to survive in the modern world. No one embodied that transformation more completely than Jim Bakker. His story marks the moment when worship crossed the line into show business and never fully came back. Bakker did not begin as a powerful figure. His early work was modest, almost innocent. Traveling programs built around puppets, smiles, and simple messages designed to comfort rather than challenge. Even then, the emphasis was not depth but feeling. The goal was reaction. Laughter, tears, connection. Cameras noticed. Producers noticed. And soon, faith was no longer just preached. It was packaged. As television expanded, Bakker understood something many pastors did not. Attention was currency. The screen rewarded energy, warmth, and performance. Sermons became segments. Prayer became programming. When PTL emerged, it was not structured like a church service. It was structured like a variety show. Interviews, music, humor, emotional testimonies, all blended into a format that felt familiar to daytime television audiences. PTL did not ask viewers to simply believe. It asked them to belong. Watching the show felt like joining a family. Donations were not framed as obligation, but as participation in something joyful and growing. Viewers sent money not out of fear, but excitement. They believed they were helping build a kingdom that looked happy, modern, and successful. That success fueled ambition. Bakker no longer wanted to dominate the screen alone. He wanted to create a physical world where faith and entertainment merged permanently. Heritage USA was born from that vision. A massive complex filled with hotels, rides, pools, shows, and constant activity. It was presented as a place where belief could be experienced like a vacation. Visitors did not just attend. They consumed. They stayed, shopped, laughed, worshipped, and spent. The line between ministry and marketplace dissolved completely. Faith became immersive. The message was clear. God was not only present in sermons. God was present in comfort, luxury, and abundance. To fund this vision, Bakker introduced lifetime partnerships. Supporters were told their donations secured them future stays, spiritual rewards, and a permanent connection to the project. The language sounded generous. The promise sounded fair. But the math did not work. Far more partnerships were sold than could ever be honored. What looked like growth was actually pressure building beneath the surface. Money flowed in constantly, but expenses grew faster. The system required endless new donations to sustain the illusion of stability. This was not a single mistake. It was structural. The entire empire depended on belief continuing without interruption. Transparency would have shattered it. So transparency never arrived. As scrutiny increased, personal scandal detonated everything at once. Allegations of inappropriate behavior surfaced. Payments made in secret. Stories that contradicted the wholesome image PTL had carefully constructed for years. The audience that once felt like family now felt betrayed. Trust collapsed faster than buildings ever could. Investigations followed. Financial records revealed chaos, misuse, and excess. Donations intended for ministry had funded luxury. Promises had been made with no ability to fulfill them. The courtroom became the final stage. Unlike television, this stage offered no applause. The verdict ended the illusion. Prison replaced pulpit. The smiling host vanished behind bars. Heritage USA shut down. The dreamland emptied. What remained was silence and disbelief. For many followers, the loss was not just financial. It was emotional. They had invested identity, hope, and meaning into a man and a movement that no longer existed. Yet even collapse did not end the story. After release, Bakker returned with a different message. Optimism gave way to fear. Joy gave way to warning. The new focus was the end of days. Survival kits. Emergency supplies. Apocalyptic language replaced cheerful promises. The product changed, but the mechanism remained the same. Fear proved just as effective as hope. Audiences still responded. Donations still arrived. The message adapted to a new emotional climate. Instead of building heaven on earth, Bakker now claimed to help people survive what was coming next. Faith once again became transactional. His story reveals something uncomfortable. The problem was never only the men. It was the system that rewarded performance over accountability. Television rewarded charisma. Donors rewarded confidence. Growth was mistaken for approval. And no structure existed to slow it down. When religion adopts the logic of entertainment, success becomes the ultimate justification. Bigger means better. Louder means truer. Crowds mean confirmation. In that environment, collapse is inevitable, because reality cannot sustain a fantasy built entirely on expansion. Bakker did not invent this model, but he perfected it early. He showed how easily belief could be transformed into spectacle, then into infrastructure, then into profit. And he showed how devastating the fallout becomes when the show finally ends. Some still view him as redeemed. Others see him as a warning. What cannot be denied is the shift he represents. After him, faith on television would never be small again. It would aim to entertain, impress, and dominate attention. Was the greatest damage caused by the scandal itself, or by the idea that belief needs spectacle to survive? In the next part, the story moves from collapse to unchecked abundance, where wealth itself becomes proof of divine favor. Part 3, Kenneth Copeland. Prosperity theology did not begin as a movement of excess. It began as a promise of control. The idea that belief, when spoken correctly, could shape reality itself. Words became tools. Faith became leverage. No figure pushed this idea further, louder, or longer than Kenneth Copeland. Before sermons, Copeland wanted music. He chased recognition through sound and performance, learning early how rhythm, confidence, and presentation could hold attention. When music failed to deliver lasting success, faith offered something more powerful. A stage where belief and authority could merge. Ministry did not replace performance. It refined it. Copeland embraced a doctrine that centered on speech as force. Speak health and sickness retreats. Speak wealth and poverty loosens its grip. Speak victory and defeat disappears. In this worldview, doubt is not caution. Doubt is sabotage. Silence is failure. Giving becomes proof of belief because money itself is framed as spoken faith made visible. This message resonated deeply with people who felt powerless. The promise was not patience. It was immediacy. Not endurance, but declaration. Copeland presented himself not as a humble guide, but as an expert in spiritual mechanics. He claimed to know the rules of an invisible system and taught others how to use it. Television amplified everything. Broadcasts reached beyond churches into homes across continents. His voice became familiar. His phrases became ritual. His confidence became contagious. Ministries expanded into media networks, training centers, and global events. Faith stopped being local. It became centralized around one interpretation, one vocabulary, one authority. As the audience grew, so did the lifestyle. Wealth was no longer hidden or minimized. It was displayed as evidence. Large homes, luxury vehicles, and private aircraft were presented not as indulgence, but as fulfillment of promise. Copeland argued that abundance glorified God and demonstrated the effectiveness of belief. The jets became symbols. Not just of wealth, but of separation. Copeland insisted commercial travel disrupted his spiritual focus. The explanation shocked many and reassured others. To critics, it sounded detached. To supporters, it sounded righteous. The divide widened. An internal airstrip completed the image. Ministry grounds transformed into a self-contained world. Offices, studios, housing, logistics. Everything needed to sustain influence without interruption. From the outside, it looked excessive. From the inside, it looked efficient. Control thrives in closed systems. Public statements intensified the controversy. Copeland spoke with absolute certainty on topics far beyond theology. Illness, disaster, global crisis. He declared authority over forces others feared. When moments of real-world suffering unfolded, his declarations were replayed endlessly, stripped of context and magnified by disbelief. For critics, these moments revealed something dangerous. Confidence without restraint. Authority without accountability. When belief is framed as power, failure is blamed on the believer. If healing does not arrive, faith was insufficient. If wealth does not appear, words were spoken incorrectly. Government attention followed. Financial investigations questioned how donations were used. Homes, travel, salaries, assets. The inquiries revealed little illegal activity, but exposed a deeper issue. Transparency was minimal. Oversight was voluntary. Accountability rested entirely within the organization itself. This created a legal and moral divide. What was permitted under law did not align with public expectation of spiritual leadership. Copeland remained protected by structure while criticized by perception. Supporters saw persecution. Critics saw privilege. Both sides hardened. The movement did not shrink. It polarized. Followers defended Copeland fiercely. They repeated his language. They adopted his posture. To them, criticism proved his importance. Resistance confirmed his authority. Dissent became spiritual opposition. Opponents saw something else entirely. They saw a belief system that rewarded the leader regardless of outcome. A system where success validated truth and failure was absorbed by the follower. The more visible the wealth, the stronger the claim of divine favor. Prosperity theology thrives on clarity. Everything is simple. Speak correctly and receive. Give generously and grow. Obedience guarantees reward. Complexity disappears. So does responsibility. Copeland did not invent these ideas, but he embodied them with unmatched intensity. His presence reshaped modern televangelism. After him, wealth was no longer awkward. It was expected. Power was no longer hidden. It was displayed. The question his story leaves behind is not whether belief can inspire success. It is whether success should ever be used as proof of truth. When faith is measured by outcome, leadership becomes immune to challenge. Copeland remains influential because his message offers certainty in uncertain lives. Control where chaos dominates. Confidence where fear grows. That appeal does not fade easily. Where do you think the line should be drawn between personal belief and public responsibility when power grows this large? In the next part, faith shifts from declarations of wealth to staged miracles, where healing itself becomes performance. Part 4, Benny Hinn. Healing became a spectacle when belief learned to move with music, lighting, and timing. The stage replaced the sanctuary. Emotion replaced patience. And the body became proof. No figure embodied this transformation more clearly than Benny Hinn. Hin's beginnings were marked by displacement and uncertainty. Raised between cultures and traditions, he struggled with belonging and confidence. He was not born into authority. He searched for it. In that search, he encountered a vision of power that promised transformation without delay. Faith was no longer something that matured quietly. It arrived suddenly, visibly, and dramatically. The shift was immediate. Hin did not build his reputation on teaching or explanation. He built it on experience. His message was simple and emotionally charged. Healing could happen now. Not gradually. Not privately. It would be seen. It would be felt. It would be undeniable. Image played a central role. The white suit became a uniform. Clean, luminous, unmistakable. It separated him from the crowd and reinforced the idea of purity and authority. Music swelled. Voices softened. Anticipation rose. Then came the moment everyone waited for. A gesture. A breath. A wave of the hand. Bodies fell backward in unison. To supporters, this was sacred power moving freely. To skeptics, it looked rehearsed. But the structure never changed. The same sequence repeated across cities and countries. The consistency made it effective. Familiarity bred expectation. Expectation produced reaction. Large-scale healing events were not spontaneous gatherings. They were carefully organized productions. Ushers positioned people. Cameras chose angles. Testimonies were selected. The most dramatic moments received the most attention. Wheelchairs, crutches, visible struggle. These visuals translated belief into broadcast. Television completed the transformation. The camera did not simply record the event. It shaped it. Close-ups captured tears. Wide shots captured crowds. Cuts eliminated hesitation. What viewers saw at home was not the full environment. It was a curated experience designed to feel undeniable. As broadcasts expanded globally, donations followed. Appeals were woven seamlessly into the programming. Giving was framed as participation in healing. Support was framed as alignment with divine movement. Money became part of the ritual, not a separate act. The lifestyle that emerged contrasted sharply with the suffering on stage. Reports surfaced of private flights, luxury hotels, tailored wardrobes, and expensive properties. These details did not appear on screen. They existed in the background, uncovered later by journalists and former staff. Investigative reporting raised uncomfortable questions. Where were the medical records? Where were the follow-ups? Where were the long-term recoveries? Dramatic moments were abundant. Verification was not. Stories of improvement circulated. Independent confirmation did not. Former insiders described pressure to heighten emotion. To emphasize reaction. To ensure the camera captured impact. Healing, they claimed, needed to look convincing to sustain momentum. Momentum sustained donations. Donations sustained the machine. Government attention followed. Financial inquiries examined how funds were handled and whether oversight existed. The findings did not produce criminal consequences, but they revealed a pattern common across televangelism. Minimal transparency. Family control. Internal accountability only. This structure created insulation. Leaders answered to no external authority. Supporters interpreted scrutiny as attack. Critics interpreted silence as avoidance. Trust fractured along familiar lines. Personal turmoil added to the complexity. Family struggles and public separations contrasted sharply with the image of spiritual authority. Messages of holiness met real human fracture. The gap between image and reality widened. Then came an unexpected moment. Hin publicly distanced himself from extreme prosperity teaching. He acknowledged that promising financial return for donations had caused harm. The statement shocked followers and critics alike. Some saw humility. Others saw repositioning. The shift did not dismantle the structure. Fundraising continued. Broadcasting continued. The language softened, but the system remained intact. Healing remained central. Performance remained essential. Hin's legacy sits in tension. To many, he offered hope when medicine failed and comfort when answers were absent. To others, he represented the commercialization of vulnerability. A system where suffering fueled spectacle and belief funded luxury. His story forces a difficult reflection. When healing is staged, where does faith end and performance begin? When emotion becomes evidence, how is truth measured? The power of spectacle lies in its immediacy. It bypasses doubt and moves straight to feeling. That power can comfort. It can also mislead. Once belief is anchored to a moment on stage, questioning feels like betrayal. Hin did not create this environment alone. He mastered it. He showed how modern media could transform ancient hope into global theater. And how difficult it becomes to separate sincerity from strategy once the curtain rises. Do you believe visible healing strengthens faith, or does it place belief at the mercy of performance? In the next part, the story turns from miracles on stage to morality behind closed doors, where public righteousness collides with private contradiction. Part 5, Ted Haggard. Public morality gains power when it appears unquestionable. It grows stronger when spoken with confidence, repeated often, and rewarded with applause. Few figures embodied that authority more completely than Ted Haggard. His rise reflected a moment when religious leadership and national influence merged into a single voice. Haggard built his image carefully. He presented himself as approachable, energetic, and morally grounded. His sermons blended humor with certainty, conviction with warmth. Congregations did not simply listen. They trusted. Growth followed quickly. A small church expanded into a massive institution, filled with families who believed they were part of something righteous and stable. As his platform grew, so did his reach beyond the pulpit. Haggard became a spokesperson for evangelical values on the national stage. Media outlets sought his opinion. Politicians listened. He was invited into rooms where belief influenced policy. In those spaces, he did not speak as a private pastor. He spoke as a representative of millions. His public stance on morality was absolute. He framed issues of sexuality as moral lines that defined cultural survival. His language left little room for nuance. Right and wrong were clearly drawn. Compromise was weakness. Obedience was virtue. This clarity appealed to those who feared cultural change and wanted firm answers. Behind the confidence, however, existed a private life carefully hidden. That life came into focus abruptly when allegations surfaced from a man who claimed a long-term secret relationship. The accusations included paid encounters and substance use. At first, denial came quickly and firmly. The claims were dismissed as lies, attacks, and political sabotage. Then evidence appeared. Recorded messages. Financial transactions. Patterns that contradicted public statements. The voice on the recordings sounded familiar. The explanations grew thinner. The story shifted from accusation to confirmation in the public eye. The collapse was immediate. Authority depends on credibility, and credibility vanished almost overnight. Haggard resigned from leadership positions. The church he built issued statements acknowledging moral failure. Members reacted with shock, grief, and confusion. Some defended him. Others felt betrayed. Many questioned their own judgment. The institution moved to contain the damage. Leadership distanced itself. Restoration programs were announced. Language focused on healing rather than accountability. Haggard entered a period described as spiritual rehabilitation, removed from public ministry and placed under supervision. This phase revealed a deeper tension. Restoration is meant to address failure. But it can also shield systems from scrutiny. Critics questioned whether the process prioritized the individual over those harmed. Supporters emphasized forgiveness and grace. The divide mirrored a broader conflict within religious culture. After time away, reports surfaced that Haggard had completed the process successfully. He described himself as changed, reconciled, restored. But restoration did not restore trust universally. For many, the issue was not the act itself. It was the contradiction between public condemnation and private behavior. Eventually, Haggard returned quietly. A new congregation. A smaller stage. Less visibility. The language softened. The tone shifted from authority to humility. He no longer spoke for a nation. He spoke to a room. Yet controversy followed. New accusations emerged over the years. None led to criminal conviction, but they reinforced unease. Patterns matter more than single events. Silence did not erase memory. Haggard's story is not only about personal failure. It is about the pressure created when leaders are elevated as moral absolutes. When image becomes mission, secrecy becomes survival. The higher the pedestal, the greater the incentive to hide what does not fit the narrative. Public morality, when disconnected from vulnerability, becomes fragile. It demands perfection from others while denying it within. Followers are taught to confess. Leaders are taught to maintain authority. That imbalance breeds isolation. The damage extended beyond reputation. Congregations fractured. Families questioned their values. Young believers learned that certainty could be performative. Trust, once broken at that scale, does not return easily. Some still argue that Haggard represents redemption. Others see a cautionary example of hypocrisy enabled by power. Both views exist because the system that elevated him never fully addressed how it failed. His rise showed how religion can shape national conversations. His fall showed how quickly authority evaporates when truth emerges. The quiet aftermath shows something else. Influence rarely disappears. It simply changes form. The uncomfortable lesson is not that leaders fail. It is that systems often protect leaders before protecting those who believe them. When morality is used as a weapon, the damage spreads far beyond the individual holding it. How much of what we trust in leaders comes from who they appear to be rather than what they are willing to reveal? In the next part, the story shifts to a man who preached against temptation with unmatched fury, only to be undone by the very sins he condemned. Part 6, Jimmy Swaggart. Power reaches its most dangerous form when emotion becomes authority. Tears convince. Music disarms. A trembling voice feels honest even when it protects control. Few figures demonstrated this dynamic more clearly than Jimmy Swaggart, a man whose rise and fall were broadcast into millions of homes in real time. Swaggart was not simply a preacher. He was a performer shaped by sound. Music ran through everything he did. His piano, his singing, his cadence from the pulpit. He understood how rhythm could bypass logic and move straight into the chest. His sermons did not unfold calmly. They surged. They accused. They wept. They exploded. Audiences did not just listen. They felt. Television magnified this power. Cameras lingered on his face as his voice cracked. Microphones captured every pause and breath. Viewers experienced something intimate and overwhelming at the same time. Swaggart preached judgment with fury and repentance with tears. He positioned himself as a man who hated sin because he loved God deeply. His influence became global. Stadiums filled. Broadcasts reached continents. Donations poured in. Albums sold. His image hardened into certainty. He spoke as if standing above temptation, warning others from a place of moral distance. Sexual sin became a frequent target. His condemnations were public, loud, and unforgiving. Then the image fractured. Reports emerged that Swaggart had been involved with a sex worker. The revelation did not come from rumor alone. It came with surveillance, testimony, and confirmation. The contrast was impossible to ignore. The men who shouted loudest about purity had been hiding a private life he publicly condemned. The response was immediate and historic. Swaggart returned to the pulpit, not with fire, but with tears. His televised confession became one of the most replayed moments in religious broadcasting. His body shook. His words broke. He admitted failure before millions. For some viewers, it felt raw and sincere. For others, it felt staged, another performance in a long career of emotional control. The apology divided his audience. Sympathy and suspicion existed side by side. Many forgave instantly. Others questioned why confession arrived only after exposure. Repentance, when broadcast, becomes difficult to separate from damage control. Institutional consequences followed. The denomination that once supported him imposed discipline and demanded a restoration process. Swaggart resisted the terms. He wanted to return quickly. Authority clashed with accountability. The conflict ended with his removal from official credentials. Rather than stepping away, Swaggart continued independently. The structure that had once restrained him no longer applied. He preached without oversight, relying on loyalty rather than permission. The audience shrank, but it hardened. Those who stayed believed deeply. Opposition became proof of persecution. Then history repeated itself. Another incident. Another encounter. Another public embarrassment. This time, the shock carried less drama and more resignation. Forgiveness had already been extended once. Credibility does not reset infinitely. The second fall did not spark debate. It sealed judgment. Mainstream influence collapsed. Networks distanced themselves. Invitations stopped. The voice that once thundered across nations now echoed within a far smaller circle. What remained was not absence, but reduction. Swaggart rebuilt quietly. A network. A church. Family members joined him on stage. The language softened. The fury faded. But the past remained present. Every sermon carried the weight of memory. Every tear invited comparison. His continued presence revealed something unsettling. Charismatic authority does not disappear when credibility erodes. It concentrates. The smaller the audience, the deeper the loyalty. In those spaces, history is reframed. Failure becomes persecution. Accountability becomes attack. Swaggart's story is not only about personal weakness. It is about how emotional performance can shield power. Tears disarm criticism. Music creates intimacy. Confession, when controlled, can restore authority without surrendering it. Public repentance feels final, but it rarely is. It resets the narrative rather than ending it. When the same figure controls the apology, the framing, and the return, repentance risks becoming another tool of influence. The deeper issue lies in the imbalance between leader and follower. Audiences are taught to confess. Leaders are taught to explain. When forgiveness flows upward faster than accountability flows downward, patterns repeat. Swaggart once shaped the moral tone of millions. His fall reshaped how televangelism was viewed. Yet he was never fully removed from influence. He simply occupied a narrower space, protected by devotion rather than scale. His life demonstrates how charisma can survive scandal, but not without cost. Trust does not vanish. It concentrates among those most willing to defend it. The lasting lesson is uncomfortable. Emotion can feel like truth. Sincerity can feel like proof. But neither guarantees change. When power is built on performance, even repentance risks becoming part of the act. Do tears signal transformation, or do they sometimes protect the very authority that allowed failure to repeat? In the next part, the story turns to money preached as blessing, where wealth itself becomes the message and belief is measured in profit. Part 7, Creflo Dollar. Money became sacred the moment it was framed as evidence of faith. Not as a tool. Not as a test. But as proof. Few figures advance this idea as directly and unapologetically as Creflo Dollar, a preacher whose very name sounded like destiny in a movement obsessed with material blessing. His beginnings were small and unremarkable. A handful of people gathered in modest spaces, drawn not by spectacle but by certainty. Dollar preached a message that cut through complexity. Faith was not passive. Faith acted. And action, in his theology, looked like giving. The seed was not symbolic. It was financial. Money placed on the altar became the language God understood. Growth came quickly. Congregations multiplied. Buildings expanded. Broadcasts reached far beyond local communities. The message was consistent and relentlessly optimistic. Poverty was not a condition to endure. It was a problem to overcome through belief. Wealth was not suspicious. It was a sign that faith was working. Dollar taught that giving unlocked divine return. Blessing followed generosity with precision. Sow and reap. Give and receive. The simplicity was its strength. For people struggling paycheck to paycheck, the promise felt empowering. Their situation was not fixed. It was temporary, waiting for activation. As the church expanded, so did the imagery. Large sanctuaries. Professional lighting. Perfect sound. The environment itself communicated success. Dollar's personal life reinforced the message. Expensive homes. Luxury vehicles. Private travel. These were not hidden. They were framed as testimony. To supporters, his lifestyle proved the system worked. He practiced what he preached. To critics, it raised uncomfortable questions. Why did divine blessing concentrate so heavily on the messenger while many believers remained in struggle? The tension grew louder as visibility increased. Media scrutiny followed. Reports detailed properties and assets far beyond what most congregants could imagine. Dollar responded by reaffirming his theology. God wanted his children to live well. Modesty was not holiness. Sacrifice was not suffering. Faith produced abundance. Government attention arrived during broader investigations into televangelism. Financial practices were examined. Oversight was questioned. Transparency was requested. The inquiries revealed little that violated the law, but highlighted a familiar pattern. Religious organizations operated with minimal external accountability. Wealth could grow without explanation. Donors rarely saw details. The most explosive moment came when the ministry launched a campaign for a private aircraft. The justification was efficiency and global reach. The cost stunned the public. The reaction was immediate and intense. Media coverage turned mocking. Social platforms erupted. Even supporters hesitated. The campaign was eventually withdrawn, but the damage lingered. The jet became shorthand for excess. It crystallized years of criticism into a single image. A preacher asking working families to fund extreme luxury in the name of faith. Personal controversy followed. Reports of family conflict entered public view. Though legal consequences did not define the outcome, the image of spiritual authority cracked. The flawless presentation no longer held. Meanwhile, cultural shifts began to erode the foundation of prosperity theology itself. Younger audiences questioned the premise. They asked why faith should be measured by income. Why suffering implied failure. Why generosity flowed upward but rarely returned downward. The language that once felt empowering now felt transactional. Belief had become investment. Prayer had become strategy. God appeared less like a presence and more like a system that rewarded the correct inputs. Dollar continued preaching. The crowds remained, though the tone changed. Defensiveness replaced confidence. Explanations replaced declarations. The message did not disappear, but it lost its dominance. His influence revealed how easily money can reshape belief. When wealth becomes sacred, questioning becomes dangerous. Doubt is reframed as envy. Criticism becomes rebellion. Accountability becomes persecution. The deeper issue was never the amount of money. It was the meaning assigned to it. Wealth as virtue. Poverty as failure. Success as spiritual validation. Once those ideas take hold, compassion shifts direction. The struggling believer blames self rather than system. Dollar did not invent this theology, but he became one of its clearest faces. His career traced its rise, peak, and slow decline. From explosive growth to cultural skepticism. From certainty to challenge. The movement did not collapse. It fragmented. Some believers held tighter. Others walked away. Faith itself did not disappear. But its relationship with money changed. What remains is a caution about symbols. When success is treated as holiness, leaders become untouchable. When money speaks for God, silence becomes submission. Dollar's story shows how belief can be shaped by aspiration. How hope can be redirected toward accumulation. And how difficult it becomes to separate faith from finance once the two are fully entwined. Is generosity still faith when the outcome is promised in advance? In the next part, the story moves from wealth to power over people, where mentorship, authority, and trust are weaponized behind closed doors. Part 8, Eddie Long. Spiritual authority becomes most dangerous when it is framed as protection. When guidance feels parental, resistance feels like betrayal. No story illustrates this tension more painfully than that of Eddie Long, a leader whose rise reshaped a community and whose fall fractured it. Long emerged at a time when many people were searching for stability, discipline, and direction. His ascent was rapid and visually powerful. A growing congregation. Expanding facilities. A commanding presence at the pulpit. He spoke with certainty and confidence, projecting strength in a world that often felt unstable. For many in the black community, he represented success achieved through faith and order. He positioned himself as more than a preacher. He became a father figure. Young men were drawn to his message of structure, masculinity, and purpose. He emphasized discipline, obedience, and spiritual authority. His mentorship programs promised guidance, opportunity, and transformation. Trust was not only encouraged. It was expected. Publicly, Long upheld a strict moral image. He spoke forcefully about values, responsibility, and traditional behavior. His appearance reinforced that message. Tailored suits. Controlled gestures. Deliberate speech. Everything communicated authority. The church environment mirrored this tone. Order was visible. Leadership was centralized. Loyalty was praised. Behind this structure, however, boundaries blurred. Allegations emerged from young men who had once been part of his inner circle. They described relationships shaped by imbalance. Gifts, trips, private access, and emotional dependence. They claimed that spiritual authority had been used to influence personal decisions and silence doubt. The accusation sent shockwaves through the congregation. The idea that a leader who preached discipline and restraint could be accused of misconduct felt impossible to many. Long responded directly from the pulpit. He denied wrongdoing. He framed the situation as misrepresentation and attack. His words were calm but firm. He asked the congregation to trust him. Reactions split almost immediately. Some stood and applauded. Others sat in silence. Many left. Trust, once unified, fractured into opposing interpretations of loyalty and truth. Faith communities rely on shared belief. Once that fractures, healing becomes difficult. The legal process did not unfold publicly. The cases were settled outside of court. No admission of guilt was made. No trial tested the claims in open view. Legally, the matter closed quietly. Morally, it did not. Settlement created ambiguity rather than resolution. Questions lingered without answers. For critics, the outcome felt unsatisfying. They questioned why transparency never arrived. For supporters, the settlement meant survival. The church could continue. The leader could remain. But something fundamental had changed. Attendance declined. Confidence eroded. The atmosphere shifted from celebration to caution. The institution long built began to weaken. Staff departures followed. Financial strain increased. The sense of invincibility disappeared. A church once defined by growth now faced contraction. Leadership transitions attempted to stabilize what remained, but trust is not easily restored once broken. As the controversy faded from headlines, another chapter emerged. Long's health declined visibly. He appeared thinner, weaker, altered. Official explanations were limited. Rumors filled the silence. Illness added a layer of complexity to an already painful story. Sympathy and skepticism coexisted uneasily. His death brought no clear closure. Supporters mourned a leader who had built community, inspired discipline, and represented success. Critics reflected on unresolved harm and unanswered questions. The legacy divided along the same lines that had split the congregation years earlier. Long's influence cannot be reduced to a single narrative. He was both builder and destroyer, mentor and accused, symbol and warning. His story reveals how power operates most effectively when wrapped in care. When authority feels loving, it becomes harder to question. The deeper issue extends beyond one individual. It exposes how spiritual environments can blur consent, silence discomfort, and reward obedience. When leaders are elevated beyond challenge, accountability dissolves. When mentorship lacks boundaries, guidance can become control. For those who trusted Long, the damage was not only public. It was personal. Faith is intimate. Betrayal within it cuts deeper than institutional failure. Some left religion entirely. Others stayed but learned to doubt. The cost was uneven and lasting. Long's church survived, but it was never the same. Influence diminished. The sense of destiny faded. What remained was memory. Competing memories. Ones shaped by gratitude and others by grief. His story stands as a warning about unchecked authority cloaked in righteousness. It shows how easily guidance can slide into manipulation when power is centralized and revered. And how difficult it becomes to confront harm when loyalty is framed as virtue. When leaders are treated as spiritual parents who protects those they are meant to guide. In the next part, the focus shifts from private control to public optimism, where positivity becomes doctrine and image becomes the message itself. Part 9, Joel Osteen. Faith changed tone when certainty was replaced with reassurance. Judgment softened into encouragement. Doctrine stepped back to make room for affirmation. No figure represents this shift more clearly than Joel Osteen, a pastor whose influence grew not through confrontation, but through comfort. Osteen never planned to stand at the center of a pulpit. His role was technical, quiet, behind the camera. He controlled framing rather than message, sound rather than theology. Then authority transferred suddenly. His father's death left a vacuum that surprised everyone, including Osteen himself. With little preaching experience, he stepped forward, not as a commanding voice, but as a gentle one. The change in style was immediate. There was no thunder, no warning, no threat. Sin was rarely named. Fear was not emphasized. Instead, sermons focused on self-belief, resilience, optimism, and personal growth. Faith became a source of encouragement rather than correction. For many listeners, this felt like relief. The response was overwhelming. Attendance surged. The congregation expanded faster than infrastructure could contain it. Eventually, worship moved into a former sports arena, transformed into a massive sanctuary. The scale was unprecedented. Screens, lighting, music, and production values rivaled major entertainment events. Church no longer felt traditional. It felt modern, accessible, and emotionally safe. Osteen's image became inseparable from the message. The smile. The calm voice. The language of possibility. He did not argue. He reassured. He did not warn. He uplifted. For millions, this approach made faith feel welcoming rather than heavy. It removed barriers that had kept them away from religion entirely. Books amplified the reach. Titles promised better lives, inner strength, and victory over adversity. They sold in enormous numbers. Media appearances followed. Broadcasts reached across continents. Osteen became less a local pastor and more a global brand. His message traveled far beyond Sunday mornings. Criticism arrived alongside popularity. Theological leaders questioned depth. They argued that comfort had replaced challenge, that scripture had been simplified into motivation. They asked whether faith without tension could sustain meaning. Supporters responded that lives were being changed, that hope mattered more than complexity. The divide revealed something deeper. Osteen did not fit traditional categories. He avoided political conflict. He avoided cultural battles. He avoided hard lines. This neutrality protected his appeal but also fueled suspicion. Silence was interpreted as avoidance. Gentleness was read as emptiness by some and wisdom by others. Then a crisis tested the image. A natural disaster devastated the city. People searched desperately for shelter. Images circulated of the massive church doors remaining closed. Accusations spread rapidly. Social outrage surged. Osteen responded by citing safety concerns and logistical issues. Days later, the doors opened. But the moment had already shaped perception. For critics, it confirmed long-held doubts. For supporters, it was misrepresentation amplified by anger. The truth sat somewhere between logistics and optics. In an era of instant judgment, image moved faster than explanation. Questions about wealth followed. Osteen stated he did not draw a salary from the church. That was accurate. But income from books and speaking engagements placed him among the very wealthy. His home became a talking point. For some, success validated his message. For others, it undermined it. Another controversy emerged during a global crisis when the church received government assistance intended to support employment. The funds were later returned, but the incident reignited debate about transparency, privilege, and responsibility. Even when corrected, perception lingered. Through each challenge, Osteen's message remained unchanged. He did not address critics directly. He continued preaching positivity, perseverance, and hope. This consistency became both strength and vulnerability. Supporters admired his refusal to engage in conflict. Critics saw avoidance disguised as peace. The central tension of his influence lies in identity. Is he a pastor or a motivational speaker? A spiritual leader or a public figure offering encouragement? The lines blur easily in an environment shaped by media. When sermons resemble inspiration, belief risks becoming self-affirmation. Yet dismissing his impact would miss something important. Millions credit his words with helping them survive grief, depression, and loss. Comfort has value. Reassurance has power. In uncertain times, a calm voice can stabilize. The question is not whether optimism belongs in faith. It is whether faith can survive when optimism becomes the primary product. When difficulty is softened, where does transformation come from? When challenge disappears, what remains of belief beyond affirmation? Osteen represents a shift in religious culture. Faith as brand. Hope as content. Positivity as doctrine. This approach thrives in a world overwhelmed by anxiety. It offers relief without confrontation. It promises improvement without discomfort. But relief is not resolution. Encouragement does not replace accountability. And a brand, once built, must be protected. Image management becomes essential. Silence becomes strategy. Osteen has not fallen like others in this story. His controversy is quieter, more ambiguous. That ambiguity may be why it lasts. There is no single moment of collapse. Only ongoing debate. His legacy continues to form. For some, he is the pastor who made belief accessible. For others, he is the symbol of faith diluted into motivation. Both views coexist because his influence operates in the space between religion and self-help. What happens to faith when it is designed to never offend, never challenge, and never confront? In the next part, the story moves beyond comfort and into control, where one man claims absolute spiritual authority and builds devotion through fear and loyalty. Part 10, Apollo Quiboloi. Absolute power takes its most extreme form when belief is no longer shared, but owned. When one voice claims exclusive access to truth, faith stops being guidance and becomes command. No modern figure demonstrates this transformation more starkly than Apollo Quiboloi. His story begins far from influence. Poverty shaped his early life. Scarcity framed his worldview. From that background emerged a message not of service, but of elevation. He did not present himself as a pastor among many. He declared himself singular. Chosen. Appointed. Not a messenger of God, but the living embodiment of divine authority on earth. This claim redefined the relationship between leader and follower. Devotion was no longer symbolic. It was literal. Obedience became spiritual safety. Doubt became rebellion. Questioning was framed as betrayal not of a man, but of God himself. Once that idea takes hold, accountability collapses completely. His organization expanded rapidly. What began as a small gathering evolved into a highly structured system. Daily life for members was regulated. Time, labor, finances, relationships. Loyalty was measured by sacrifice. The more given, the purer the devotion appeared. Control did not rely on force alone. It relied on fear of spiritual consequence. The public image contrasted sharply with internal discipline. Broadcasts showed celebration, worship, and certainty. Behind that image stood layers of authority and surveillance. Former members later described isolation, pressure, and psychological dependence. Identity dissolved into function. The organization replaced family, conscience, and self. As devotion deepened, the empire expanded outward. Media networks amplified the message. Properties multiplied. Political connections formed. Wealth accumulated. Protection followed. Influence reached beyond religion into business and public life. To supporters, this success proved divine favor. To critics, it raised alarms. Serious accusations emerged over time. Claims of coercion, abuse, and exploitation surfaced from former insiders. They described a system that blurred consent and obedience. They alleged that spiritual authority was used to justify control over bodies, labor, and silence. These were not isolated stories. They followed a pattern. International attention followed. Investigations moved beyond rumor into formal action. Authorities alleged that the organization operated as more than a church. The language shifted from belief to structure, from devotion to operation. Charges painted a picture of a system that used faith as cover for harm. Legal pressure intensified. A federal case placed Quibeloy on an international wanted list. Assets were examined. Associates were detained. Networks were disrupted. Yet the central figure remained beyond reach, shielded by geography, influence, and loyalty. Throughout this period, followers did not retreat. They doubled down. To them, accusations were proof of persecution. Opposition confirmed righteousness. The more intense the scrutiny, the stronger their belief became. Reality fractured into parallel truths. This response reveals the deepest danger of personal worship. When belief is tied to identity, admitting error feels like self-destruction. Followers defend not only the leader, but their own past sacrifices. To question the system would mean questioning everything they gave up to belong. Quibeloy continued to speak with certainty. He framed himself as targeted, misunderstood, chosen. His words reassured the faithful and hardened division. The world outside became hostile territory. Inside, loyalty felt like safety. The future remains unresolved. Legal processes move slowly. Devotion moves faster. The question is no longer only about guilt or innocence. It is about consequence. What happens to people whose lives are built entirely around one unquestioned authority? History shows that systems built on absolute devotion rarely dissolve cleanly. Even when leaders fall, belief lingers. It reshapes itself. It searches for justification. It resists closure. Quibeloy's story represents the extreme end of a pattern seen throughout this series. Charisma becomes authority. Authority becomes control. Control becomes immunity. When faith is fused to one identity, truth becomes whatever protects that identity. The cost is not abstract. It is personal. Families divided. Lives redirected. Futures surrendered. The harm is not always visible immediately. It accumulates quietly beneath certainty. This is where the line must be drawn clearly. Faith can inspire community. It can provide meaning. But when it demands unquestioning obedience to one human voice, it stops being belief and becomes captivity. Whether justice arrives through courts or history, one truth remains unchanged. No individual should ever hold unquestioned spiritual power over others. Do you think devotion becomes more dangerous when it promises salvation or when it demands loyalty? In the next part, we step back from individuals and examine the system that allowed all of these figures to rise, fall, and in some cases, return unchanged.